pinching the place on the dial where you expect to hear your favourite sound, or even drowning it out completely. Pirate radio has its supporters, not least amongst the thousands of people who are thought to listen to it regularly. But from Monday, it's under attack. Instead of small fines that leave the pirates more or less free to carry on broadcasting, increased powers under the new Telecommunications Act mean the illegal stations now face a team of specially trained investigators, heavy fines, imprisonment, and confiscation of their equipment. Fran Morrison's been tuning in to the pirate wavelengths.
1017 kilohertz, 299 meters, the news on Sunshine.
Convoys of lorries have been defying the minor...
For the people of Ludlow in Shropshire, independent radio news on the hour, every hour, and stolen. It's being pinched out of the airwaves and rebroadcast from an illegal 40-foot transmitter in a field outside Ludlow by a classic pirate radio operation. Broadcasting from a makeshift studio in a barn, Radio Sunshine pays none of the hefty overheads of legal local radio. No proper salaries, no news-gathering costs, no high-class engineering, and no copyright fees on records. And that, to the BBC and the Independent Broadcasting Authority, is an outrage.
We think the pirates are a pain. They're confusing, they're operating outside the law, and they're making it very difficult for the legitimate broadcasters, whether the BBC or the independents. Clearly, the pirates are in a self-indulgent position in which they're not observing the law, and we very much hope that government will be able to find the resources to apply the law rigorously.
Thank you. Right, thank you, Colin. One more in the can.
Yeah.
Cheerio.
Radio Sunshine does broadcast a lot of useful local information, but you wonder if the vicar, the job advertisers, and even the local police with their missing persons appeals really know what overheads the station is ducking in its claim to be a community service.
If you had to pay all those overheads, would you be a viable proposition?
The system how it's working at the moment is profitable now, but if you're comparing, if you want to take the station now and plonk it in the middle of Worcester or Hereford and say operate and make it viable, what we're doing at the moment, no, it wouldn't be viable at all.
So you're sitting pretty, really, aren't you?
It's great.
And it is great. With the advertisers queuing to get on, Sunshine's profits for its sole owner, Graham Simmons, are alleged to be at least £50,000 a year.
This is a pretty graphic example of how cheap it is to set up your own pirate radio station. You need, obviously, a transmitter. This, inside a caravan in a field outside the studio, is Radio Sunshine's transmitter. This is all it takes, and this cost as little as £10,000, a fraction of what the IBA stations have to pay every year in transmitter rental. This is top quality professional equipment, and you could actually set up a station for a fraction of that £10,000.
Just 30 miles away, the independent local station in Worcester, Radio Wyvern, pay £40,000 a year to rent their transmitters from the IBA. Wyvern's DJs have to keep a careful note of copyright fees on records. At about £1.20 per disc played, that's another £40,000 a year. While Sunshine simply steals news out of the ether, Wyvern's news gathering costs £90,000 a year. So, as Sunshine poach their audience and their advertisers, it's small wonder Radio Wyvern feel they're just not in a fair fight.
I feel utterly frustrated and impotent because the people in authority that we've asked to do something for us, namely the whole Home Office and the Department of Trade and Industry, have done little or nothing to date about stamping out these illegal operations. I rather feel like Prometheus chained. We absolutely are shackled. I mean, we're in a vice of regulation, which I'd love to break out of.
The BBC's local stations are just as angry. Though they're not vulnerable to having advertising income poached, they face similar obligations on transmitter power, copyright, news gathering and wages. So are the government's restrictions just too tight? Should Britain, like several other countries, throw the already crowded airwaves open to a free-for-all, lift the controls on the legitimate services, and let anyone who wants to open a radio station just get on with it. Well, at the Home Office, that idea gets pretty short shrift. The government hopes to crack down on the pirates with the new law, rather than to change the present setup.
We've got a pretty open broadcasting system here. We broke the BBC monopoly 30 years ago, and that turned out to be a good thing. We've done the same now with radio, so that the BBC local radio operates alongside, sometimes in competition with, commercial radio. So it's not as if we're operating some stiff monopoly. We're not. It's a perfectly reasonable system.
How much of a reassurance can you give that the new Telecommunications Act really means that the government means business against the pirates?
There's no doubt about this. We intend to crack down. We think that pirate broadcasting is unfair to the people who are broadcasting within the law, unfair in as much as it interferes. They just choose their own wavelength, and that may well interfere with other people. And unfair because there isn't any assurance of standards in what they broadcast.
But some changes may be on the way. After a major international reshuffle of the airwaves later this year, there's going to be a bit more room in Britain on the VHF band. That could make way for something called community radio, and it could sound something like this.
Well, good evening, everyone. Welcome once again to Border Radio. It's Harry Marshall here with you until, well, 4 o'clock in the morning again.
For 12 years, Harry Marshall's been an illegal radio pirate, broadcasting border radio from his sitting room to a tiny corner of Twickenham in London. But he keeps a carefully low transmitter signal, doesn't carry adverts, and pays for border out of his own pocket. It's a kind of local social service with music.
Radio, you see, is the ideal medium for penetrating into the homes of the lonely. I mean, it's very, very important. If somebody's very depressed or very lonely, and they ring in, we have a little chat, and I ask them what music they want. We can get out on the air within a few minutes, and they feel, well, somebody cares. The BBC and the IBA, they're not geared up for a personal service. They can't be.
Amongst the elderly, housebound and widowed of Twickenham, Harry has some 20,000 listeners.
I think when you hear of this Good Neighbour scheme, well, I don't think it's got anything on Harry Marshall.
I was so lonely. I'd lost my husband, and they played this wonderful record for me, and then rang me back to see if I was all right.
It's the fact that he's there.
That's right.
That if anybody has a disaster, breaks a leg or has a stroke or has to go to hospital, you know he'll hop out of bed and run round.
We could be registered as charities. We could have grants from local authorities, or even be controlled by them. Or even just run on the lines of hospital radio, covering a small neighbourhood. That's the sort of licence that I would like. Well, everyone, we've come to the end of transmissions on Border Radio, not only for tonight, but unfortunately until we get a licence, hopefully towards the end of 1985. I'd just like to take this opportunity of thanking you all for your fantastic support. You've made Border Radio very, very worthwhile, as you know. And on behalf of Eamon and Bill and Joy and everyone connected with it, I'd just like to thank you very, very much indeed. Thank you very much, and bye-bye.
It seems sad that the few well-meaning pirates like Harry Marshall should also be hit by the new powers in the Act. Rather than risk having his equipment seized, Harry's now closing down. It could be a long time before the community radio lobby bring operations like his back to life. Meantime, his listeners feel they're losing out because so many other pirates have been bigger, brasher and greedier.
That report by Fran Morrison.